sometimes it does feel like it's ourselves, it's Asians that put other Asians down. um, one accusation of cultural appropriation instead of checking the validity of the explanation, or sometimes even if they already hear a valid explanation, they will still not listen to that, and they would rather just demand that the artist or the person that was accused of cultural appropriation apologize, and they demand that Asians should not do this anymore and stuff like that. So it feels like, yeah, sometimes that I would want us to be allies in promoting our own culture, in uplifting ourselves, but yeah, it does feel like sometimes it's we're each other's enemies. So one person asked me, like, how what are the simple things, given the busy schedule that we all have, living our own lives, paying our bills, are there any easy things that we can do to promote our own culture? One is, I try to incorporate it in my own fashion, in my own apartment, in my own house or my car. So I have a lot of pieces, clothing pieces that is reflective of Asian culture. So in the Philippines, we have what we call the Barong Tagalog, which is like the suit, the Philippine version of a suit. And so I have the female version of that suit, and that's what I wear for formal occasions. I also try to wear like ethnic design. We have a lot of indigenous people in the Philippines, and they have their own like design elements and they put it in their accessories and stuff, necklace, earrings, and bracelets. So I own a lot of that, and I would constantly wear them. And the same thing is true for my house. I have a lot of pieces in my house, that in my apartment, that's actually very reflective of the Philippine culture, Asian products, and Asian culture. So I don't have a carpet, but I have a banig. It's actually our own version of a mattress, and that's what I use as a carpet in the second room, which is my office, this office. So maybe one day I'll do like a tour or something, but it's very small. Okay, so but it's a very effective talk piece because it's very visual. So when they see something different and something pretty, other people would actually go out and ask, like, hey, what's that? Where'd you get that? And then I start sharing about my own culture, about Asian history and stuff. Next is, I actually included in my expression. So it's very impolite for you to say things or talk in another language, especially if it's a language that the other person won't understand. But there are certain like small expressions that I use. I know some Korean words, so I would usually use words, even though they don't completely understand what it is. They kind of feel like it's just my expression, and some of them would actually ask, like, hey, what's that, what does that mean? And so I'd start sharing, or sometimes I would volunteer that, oh, this is what I said, especially if I think that the person is actually like listening and trying to comprehend what it was that I said. Next is that I use when I give away gifts, I usually choose Asian products. So, like for example, when I came back to the Philippines for a visit last April, when I came back home, of course, I gave some people gifts from the Philippines because that's just our culture. We give gifts. Um, and so I gave them lambanog, which is the Philippine version of a gin, and or vodka or something like that. And so I gave it to them, and then included a small note explaining what it is, where it came from, and then it became like a conversational piece because a lot of them asked, like, oh, why is it 60% alcohol? Wine here is like 12, 13%, but lambanog is actually 60% alcohol. So stuff like that. And then the Christmas before that, I gave away pandesal, which is the traditional um, breakfast for Filipinos. And so there's somebody here who sells pandesal that's actually very close to our authentic pandesal. And that's what I gave away as a Christmas gift to some friends and some office mates. I've given away some in Thailand inspired gifts, Korean inspired gifts. And again, it becomes a conversation piece. They ask, like, what is this? And then I start talking about Asian culture, Asian history. And we end up exchanging cultural tidbits and cultural trivia. Okay, I still speak the language. Of course, again, it's very impolite here to talk your own language with somebody, to use your own language with somebody who doesn't understand that language. But amongst ourselves, like if when I'm with my friends, we still all talk in Filipino. And we don't care if other people hear it. If not, they're not included in the conversation, then it's none of their business. But most of the time, somebody would actually approach us like, hey, I don't actually understand what you're saying, but what is that? That you're like, what is that language? And most of the time, they would always say that they don't necessarily understand the words, but because Filipino, the language, is a very emotional language, just like many Asian languages, they end up understanding the emotion behind the words, which is very interesting. Next is food. Whenever I have a chance, I actually give away Asian cuisine. So we have a friend of mine actually organized the Samakana Caravan, which is a Filipino themed food caravan that goes around different parts of Soka. And so I asked, I would buy some stuff there and then I would give it away to some people. Or that I would do that for like Korean food. You know, if I come from Korea, then I would buy some Korean chips and whatever, I give it away. And again, I think 99.99999% of people in the world are actually interested in food. They love food. And so it becomes a conversation piece. It becomes an opportunity for me to share my culture, my views to them about our own culture and our own history. No, next is that I actually look for allies in groups that share the same interest. As I've said in my intro, sometimes it's very hurtful because it's other Asians that are putting Asians down. But there are few out there who do the same thing as I do. They promote Asian culture, they uplift Asian artists, Asian products, Asian history. And so I look for these people and I support them. I get in touch, I offer to do projects with them because we're stronger together, right? So I support them. I also support bloggers, YouTube content providers or creators. I support them. I offer to do like to help in any way that I can. And quite honestly, it's sort of liberating because between looking for groups to belong to, looking for allies, and supporting other channels that are doing the same thing, I don't have much time for anything else. So I don't really busy myself with wars and all this Twitter hate and stuff like that. I don't have the time. I have a full-time job. I have several full-time jobs, and then I have this, and so between all of that, I don't have time to actually dwell on silly matters. So I am just concentrating on Asian. I'm so full of Asian content. I support Asian products, Asian artists, Asian businesses. You know, come on, we need to help others as well. So my playlists in iTunes are actually full of Asian artists. I have like 1-2 playlists with Western songs, but most of them are Asian artists. Many of them I don't understand what they're saying, but the melody is great. If somebody is in my car riding with me, I would still play my song, my Asian playlist. And most of the time they're like, hey, I don't understand what they're saying, but I'm digging that beat or that melody. So it only proves that if we just sort of make an effort, we will find something in common. We will find that connection that we all need. And also, of course, they need the income. So if I'm buying something, might as well buy from an Asian producer, an Asian businessman. Okay. I study my own history, meaning the Asian history. Of course, I don't have a lot of time to do that, but I do the best that I can. But more importantly, it's not just the events that I study, but the meaning of the events, how it affected the history, how it's affected the culture. And I appreciate that when you understand the real meaning of the events, the actual effects of the events, you're able to actually appreciate your own history and your own culture. One example would be the Death March in the Philippines. Death March in the Philippines. So during the time when the Japanese was occupying the Philippines, they made Filipinos walk like hundreds of miles, hundreds of kilometers, and it killed. And then they starved these people, and it killed, beat them up, and shank them, stab them. Okay, and so many of them actually died. That's why it's called the Death March. Now, of course, that's a horrific thing. That's unforgivable. A very, very dark time in our history. And after that, they enslaved us. Now, later on, I realized that the Japanese did that because according to their culture, there's nothing lower than surrendering. Like if you're being held captive as a prisoner, it would be better to die than to surrender. So for them, they're doing us a favor because according to their culture, um, being a slave or surrendering is lower than death. So it still doesn't excuse what they did, but but I understand where they're coming from. So, and I think that's just the key to unity. We just need to understand where we're all coming from. Again, it doesn't excuse the horrific thing that they did, the horrific things that they did, because it's just one of the many. But at least I'm able to understand where they're coming from. And so I try to do that in everything that I read about Asian history, Asian culture, Asian races. And last, I do not let others' history, others' interests, others' culture or race be above mine. The same way I do not expect them to put mine above theirs. We're all equal. So I understand, I appreciate, I support them in their practice of their culture, in whatever it is that they're doing. But the same way, I also expect them to respect mine. I guess the one glaring experience would be braids. A lot of people say that Asians shouldn't be using braids because it plays an important part of the history of African Americans, and I fully sympathize with that. I will not pretend I know the full history of what African Americans went through in America. I will never pretend that I know how they feel. That's just ludicrous because I'm not a part of that history. I'm just a bystander, benefiting actually from the struggles and the victories that they've owned. So I fully support that. But need, I also want others to realize that it's also a part of my history, part of history of Asians, and that we need to also observe and practice our own traditions, our own culture. So yeah, those 10 things. Hope that helps.